I kind of wonder if because you sort of span the spectrum from these kind of big staffed like these big staffed sort of Michelin-starred restaurants to the sort of two-person pop-up, which has you know all the constraints. Like you don't necessarily have the ideal kitchen that you've set up for years. You don't have the people. It's kind of a like usually I imagine probably kind of you're doing a menu once and that's it.
Totally.
And I wonder how you've either translated or discarded or come up with new sort of systems to sort of match either scenario.
Now, the first question I'll always ask before I ask about well, it's in that first list of questions I ask is what is the setup that I have? Like, do I have an oven? Do I have a freezer? I mean, I think I tell the story in one of the videos about how like we planned to do an ice cream dish and there was no fucking freezer at that restaurant. And it was like, how do we do that? How do we navigate that? And almost now, always, I have it down now. I didn't have it down when I first started this whole thing. I was very much so in the mentality of like, the dish comes first and then we kind of like force it into the venue or the kitchen or whatever resources we have. Now it's very much so on the opposite end of the spectrum. I see what equipment and what resources I have, and then that dictates the menu. So I guess some takeaways from that is if you're working in a small environment, how can you use like height to your advantage if you don't have like width?
Yeah.
So there's like some really nice plastic Cambro containers you can get that are like super tall. They're like 22 quart Cambros that are really tall, and you can clip a circulator on the side of it. And you can do a shit ton of food in that container, in that vessel, as opposed to doing like a giant Lexan that's super wide. And that might be a little hack you can use to save yourself some space so you can continue to cook while half of your kitchen isn't taken up by a Lexan.
Right.
But I mean, the other thing that, and this is kind of might not help you very much, but it's something that I've certainly taken into account, is that if there's not a ton of heating elements, I've gotten really good at working with dishes that I would really struggle at the beginning of boxing myself into, like hot dish followed by hot dish followed by hot dish. And a lot of it was like I would put a dish on a menu that was like had a like the main element of it was fried, like it was like a tempura thing or a croquette or something, and I did not have the resources available to push out really beautifully fried crispy food, and it backfired. And it was like, so what I got really good was there's a term in the restaurant world called TED, which basically means room temperature, and it's like tons of amazing cuisines around the world, like Chinese food and like Mediterranean diets do a lot of like grilled and then marinated vegetables that don't have to be hot, that are served beautifully room temperature in like some sort of acidic something, with some olive oil or some fresh herbs and whatever. It's delicious. And that way, like if you guys really want to do something that's like a beautiful kimchi rice bowl something, you can make that vegetable garnish and one less thing that you have to worry about just coming out hot. I think that's a thing that has been a really powerful takeaway for me, as like every single thing that I see that's room temperature and that can ideally sit for a couple of minutes is like such a time saver, because it's another thing that you can offer without, I mean, you can literally only be doing not one thing at a time, but you can only be in one place at a time.
Right.
So yeah, start to think about that a little bit. Like, how can you work in room temperature things into your, so ideally for dinner for you two, only one thing is hot. What does that look like? Right.
Right. Got it. Yeah. One thing you talked about once was how before you had put in, I can't pronounce the name of the restaurant in Norway. But before you had put in the system where you were sort of hanging clipboards above every station for the produce list, that basically shit would get lost. Like
totally.
You had to yell at the thing, you wouldn't necessarily transcribe it right or whatever. And so I'm wondering, in kind of in general, when those things kind of happen, you show up to the day of when you're cooking, and you just don't have something that you need. How do you deal with that?
Sometimes, it can go one of two ways. You can either completely, like, if it's completely necessary and the dish would not be the same without it, there needs to be something where like someone needs to go find it, and that's very important to have people that are available to take care of that. It's also one of those things where um, I've gotten really good at figuring out what works as backup plans as certain things. And I mean, there's no that just comes with experience. I can't teach anybody that. You need to decide that for yourself of what, if we don't have this wine or we don't have this, if the chives didn't come, what's the alternative? That system that I created was more or less an accountability thing where you had you try to create as many fail safes as possible, and those fail safes ideally lessen the amount of, oh, I forgot, or oh, I wrote it down here and I just didn't prioritize putting it on the, you know what I mean? So, and this is very very much so back to the systems. When I'm creating systems, I try to make sure that if the thing is not bulletproof, there is something else that supplements it. I'm trying to think of a good example. So when we will do menus, the menu is always posted in Google Drive, and then it's also posted in Trello that's itemized. And we're going to get more into itemized stuff later. But I going back to that produce list thing, it would be so frustrating when I would hear, oh, I wrote it down on my prep list, I just forgot to tell you. So what I would identify with is, oh, the communication part is so that's very important, is figuring out like, it's not that you wrote it down and forgot to tell me. It's that the communication from you to like distilling it down to what is the actual problem. The actual problem was the communication of you, because you communicated it to your list. It didn't get communicated to me. That was the problem.
Right.
And so by, you can write it down on your list. You can write it down on your arm. You can get it tattooed on your leg. I don't care. But if it's not on the clipboard, it's not going to get ordered. You know what I mean? So that is a very clear.
I love that tidbit, because I think that for me at least resonates really strongly. I think this is something that happens to us internally as well.
Yep.
I mean, this freaking happened to me yesterday. I was like, between like going to my recipe, which was like, set up to do like 4 servings or so, and sort of multiplying that up to 8, and then transferring it to my grocery list, like somewhere along the way, I lost a zucchini.
Correct.
And so I end up 2 hours later with like a grocery bag with like the wrong amounts
of whatever in it. Yeah,
and
totally.
like it was freaking written down somewhere, but just it didn't get to the right place.
Yeah, and I don't know, like the solution to that is, I mean, maybe the solution is, and I would have this with some things I would do, is like wherever that pivotal moment is, wherever that turn happens in the process, maybe you have a thing at the end of your prep list that says cross-reference original recipe.
Right.
It's like, if you know that every single time before you leave the grocery store or before you start the checkout process, you cross-reference that original recipe, and that saves you, then that's the system that needs to be put in place. But you need to, because sometimes you could have it be a voice skill that you program into your Alexa where you're talking to her about your shopping list. And again, it goes back to like identifying where that problem happens and how to arrange the system so that those key, what do they call it, KPIs, key performance indicators, don't, they all match up.
To me, this is the kind of thing where like this is sort of prime for this is why I love you talking about systems so much. Like, it's prime for kind of automation. It's like exactly the kind of thing that that people are like bound to screw up some way or another. And it's also I mean, you're the first professional I've talked to about this, but so I could be wrong about this. So I imagine it's not the kind of thing that people like really enjoy doing. This is not like
Correct.
the thing that people get into cooking for. It's not like remembering that, like, if I have one zucchini for a fourth thing, you know what I mean?
Sure. And I think another thing that I want to touch on with that is that Tim Ferriss says something along the lines of like, the good system that you stick with is better than the perfect system that you don't.
Yeah.
And building in, like, as long as you anticipate that these things are going to happen, like bad things, like sometimes you're going to forget something and sometimes you're going to make a mistake. That's okay.
Right.
And, being able to take those in stride and just continue to keep going like you could have a perfect system, but if you forget that zucchini and now you're like, well, now I can't make dinner, that is like so crippling. And then it doesn't matter that, that you have a great system, because ultimately you didn't make dinner because there was a flaw in your thing.
Right.
And it's just really important not to judge yourself based on, if something went wrong or something, if there was a hiccup, it's the worst thing you can do, because I don't know, there's another interview I was listening to the other day where it's like, if you go into it like the only thing you anticipate is that problems are going to happen, you're going to be unfazed, because then it's going to come and you're going to be like, oh, cool, I was expecting this to happen, as opposed to like, I have this perfect system and it's going to be amazing and it's like I have it all laid out and whatever. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that video. The next one is linked up right here for your convenience as part of the playlist. If you like content like this, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any new videos. And most importantly, I'm known for publishing my own takeaways as part of most of the interviews that I do, but because I did so much blabbing in this interview itself, I would like to know what your takeaways are. Please let me know down low in the comments. Get some color on that like button, and I'll see you in the next video. My name's Justin Khanna. Have a good one.